Hey everyone, welcome to the Ecobite podcast, where we will be diving into topics around the environmental industry. Join me, Cameron Davis, and Ecobot's product manager and seasoned environmental scientist, Liv Haney, in a deeper conversation with our guest. If you'd like more context to our conversation and/or a crash course on the topic at hand, please view the Ecobite video recording before getting started. Either way, enjoy. Hey everyone, welcome to the Ecobite podcast. We are speaking with Mike Rolband of the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. I am Cameron Davis, and I'm here with my co-host.
I'm Liv Haney.
And if you haven't already, go ahead and listen to Mike's presentation on what he's up to in Virginia, especially with the PEEP program. But we're going to dig a little bit deeper based on that discussion. So, Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Liv, you have any questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, that was a great talk that you gave discussing permitting reform and the future of electronic permitting submittals and tracking and just the general breadth of information that can be shared with the public and just making everything more transparent from application to submittal to approval and denial and all of that in between. My first question, a little bit of a fun question, is you mentioned a history of wetland delineations. When you first went out and started doing delineations, what tools did you take with you? What did you have at your disposal?
Well, the very first time I got involved in wetland delineation, I met the Army Corps of Engineers on the site, and he was a geotechnical engineer, a civil engineer that specialized in geotech, and so was I. And so we used blow counts for bearing capacity. So basically, a wetland was an area down in Florida, and it was an area that had high water table and low bearing capacity. Same thing back in '85 when I moved to Virginia. It was the same issue. We had to get an individual permit, and what was defined as a wetland back in '85 was based on pure engineering principles. And it made a lot of sense to me because when I was in grad school, one of our professors in particular felt we were going to help save the world by focusing development in these wastelands called wetlands that were close to urban areas and had low bearing capacity and high groundwater tables. It was fascinating to watch, to live through the evolution of all of a sudden we had a manual 87 and we're looking at plants as well as just soils and groundwater. And what became a wetland then was a much drier environment than what we were talking about, true swamps. So it was a totally different way of going. And then as mitigation started being required, I really enjoyed it because it was just using the same engineering principles that we use to drain and utilize these quote wet areas. We're just trying to restore them back. So it's the same soil permeability issues and water elevation issues and growing season. So it was kind of fun to live through that evolution.
Yeah, that's awesome. I don't know if I have met or worked with a pre-wetland delineation manual wetland delineator. That's awesome.
Mike, you have a very unique perspective because you both have an engineering background as well as a wetland background. And I think in a lot of organizations, they are like two different steps of the process. Your wetland, I think Liv said earlier, it's like the Bugs and Bunny people go out and play in the mud, and then they bring it back to the office where the engineers are, doing the real work, which I don't believe is actually what's happening.
I did not say that.
But it seems like, okay, so you were, there was an engineering perspective before the manual came out, and now it's very, very important to the built environment. Can you explain the transition over the years, and if there is anything that you would, want engineering side and the wetland side to know about each other to work more, synergistically?
Well, yeah, I started really more in the construction side, even just wanting to get things built. But I think it's, I think I have a good background, or I like my background. I mean, the environmental side. I mean, I grew up in northern Vermont, and from fifth grade on, and loved hiking and mountaineering, and so I just mostly spent my time outside. And we had a biology teacher in high school that ran our outing club, and I think, I didn't realize at the time what I learned from him, and the appreciation for the environment. It's always been a tension between, protecting the environment and regulations, and more engineering, just trying to get things built. And I think that tension is good in many ways. But I also think, we need to, some of the large organizations that have people totally stovepiped is a big problem. And so, when I first started, I started my basement all alone. And obviously my company grew to a lot bigger than that. And we started having, we definitely had that stovepiping to a degree, and I had to work on that and make engineers, do work with wetland delineators and vice versa. But there are a lot of people who are just there, they went to engineering school or majored in environmental science or wetland ecology they had different strengths and weaknesses. So you got to get everyone to appreciate each other, and that doesn't always happen. And when I was selling my company, we were at around 100 people, and eventually grew to a couple hundred people with their capital. I sold to a firm that they didn't have an engineer. I mean, we were the first professional engineers they had. And I'm a PE and a PWS and a PWD, which is a Virginia certification, by the way, professional wetland delineator. And I was actually one of the few people back in '93, I think it was, when the Army Corps certified us to be delineators when they were going to have that program. There's not that many engineers in that space, but I think you really, to communicate better, you do. And what I found is we were having a lot of problems with wetland projects and stream restoration projects due to stormwater discharges. So I had the ability to be able to communicate with the different engineers involved and talk about, well, what you're doing for this discharge, this is what it's doing to the environment. We need to change that. We need the water, but we need the water in a different way, or modulated, from a quantity control standpoint, or quality or volume, and which is also kind of fun. So it led to me creating what's called the energy balance method of stormwater management, which was adopted statewide, actually in Fairfax County in 2005 and statewide in 2014. But again, it's trying to get engineers to work with the scientists and the environmentalists to try to find solutions that achieve, a better result. I mean, I'll get on my soapbox. I built my office building in 2005, made an example of low impact development, and we, with one of the master's students that did the monitoring, showed that we replicated the runoff. It's actually below the forest level of runoff from our site after, building and building parking lots. But we had a green roof on part of it, a cistern for the irrigation, a cistern for the toilets, pervious pavers, pervious concrete, pervious asphalt, a bioswale, a rain garden, all sorts of different things that, as a treatment train system, could replicate that original environment in terms of stormwater discharges, to make it as less a footprint as we could to the watershed. So
you are like the Steve Jobs of environmental science. I love it.
He's a lot more successful. I'm just in my own little tiny pond, but it's been it's fun.
No, you've created all these things that you're now just like chilled, dropping in, like, oh yeah. You created the method that the whole state uses for this, so casual.
Before it was cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I definitely, in my experience with consulting, I spent a lot of projects when I first started being very siloed and just sending off my report and never really seeing it or hearing about it again. And then towards the end, I started working on some projects where they wanted everyone involved throughout the whole process, which was really interesting. And I liked that because I like to see a project from start to finish. But getting to work and hear from the construction people and right-of-way people and engineers, and then the environmental scientists too, and we're all talking about how can we mitigate potential permitting issues before we even start designing. And I think that was a really effective way to try, and it was a big headache sometimes because there was a lot of unknowns, but it was an effective way to minimize permitting time on the end, because these clients had just such bad experiences with permits taking much too much time, or some of the issues that you mentioned, and why PEEP has been a good solution to that. It seems like you guys have come up with all of these great solutions in-house. What can developers, what software engineers, people from the outside, from the tech world, what can they do to provide some resources to help further the goals of the e-permitting process and getting everything digitized and streamlining in the most effective way possible?
That's a great question. I mean, the things that we're doing, like for example with PEEP, that is just basic project management. You know, there's nothing new. I mean, I finished business school in 1982, and
business school too? What is?
Yeah,
You've
I was
gone
very
to
lucky.
every college.
I got a fellowship that paid for 2 master's degrees, so I was very lucky. I mean, I anyway, so it gave me a good background. But my point is, in business school, even undergraduate engineering, we learned about project management. And the first step is, just developing a schedule. At one time, I wanted to use more of a critical path management system, or even better, a PERT system. But the statistical analysis needed for PERT and the complexity of trying to explain to everybody, I kind of went back to just keep it simple, stupid, and just have the most basic Gantt style bar chart, schedule. And that works, it always has worked well, especially for relatively simple processes like these are, compared to a huge complex, billion-dollar construction project, or even $100 million.
Mm-hmm.
So what I think is that anyone could do this. I mean, you just have to want to do it, if that makes sense. And I'm not changing the permit decision process. I'm not changing, what people are doing. We're just simply looking at it and breaking it up in elements and then tracking it. And I will say, back in 2000, I'm not bragging, but I co-wrote the wetlands law in 2000 and in Virginia. And what we dealt with, isolated wetlands and ephemeral streams and tulloch ditching back then. And when I say we, it was a compromise. I represent the home building community and the commercial builders, and we worked with the environmental groups led by the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, and we came up with a constructive solution to what the state's going to regulate. Okay, and it has not changed. At the same time, we were trying to focus on permit efficiency by establishing the number one problem is what is required to review a permit. So we established a checklist, a list of what applicants have to submit, because most of the delays are that back and forth with the agencies, where you send something in, they want more, you send more, they want more, and people fight and blame on each other. So the first thing is upfront, what do you want? And that's what we're doing right now, DEQ, in every program. So part of PEEP is just simply basic, I want to call it common sense or project management. What do you need? Okay, on both, so that the people that want the permit provide everything they want, and the people that have to review the permit get everything they need. And then have, a schedule that everyone can see. It's not secret anymore. We know where you are, and then compare your progress. Things happen. It doesn't always work perfect. But one thing we're seeing, for example, like in our stormwater program, that was our worst performing program. It's becoming phenomenally good already. And we're not live on PEEP yet even. But just that process of establishing a checklist, and all of a sudden plans are coming in a better fashion. And you're limiting somewhat of the problem, where if certain companies submit a plan, our reviewers, I found out, don't review the plan. They wait usually 60 days, 45 days, because by then they'll get a new plan that's better. So what companies are doing is submitting incomplete materials and then saying to the owner to meet the owner's schedule. Then they blame the agencies for slow review while they're finishing the application or the plan set to then submit again. So the reviewers we're getting smart. will not work on that company's stuff, wait a while because they'll get something better. Then they get it, and then they review it, and they find incomplete. And it's just extending the whole process. So already with PEEP going public, it's been awesome because a couple of owners have called and complained. And I used to have to, send an email, and it could take a lot of staff effort to find out what happened, where's the plan, who's reviewing it, what are the issues. They summarize it. Now you just go online and look at it. And already we've had a couple of great examples where the applicant's agent told the applicant that it was being held up by DEQ, and actually they had met our 15-day criteria. One was 14, one was 11 days. It had gone back and sitting there for months. But they admitted finally to their client that, well, they don't have the staff to actually finish the complete application. So they were just, normally DEQ doesn't respond and doesn't look at things so fast. Well, now they are, because our guys are being, told they have to do it. And it's really fun because the people that are reviewing the process like it better because they know what's expected of them, and they're getting better quality information in. So it's really just project management that could be done anywhere in any state. And I don't know, I just took an existing database system. We didn't have the money or time or people to develop from scratch a whole system. So we just looked at, okay, what do we own? What do we use right now? What type of software do we have because they're tracking the data, it's just not in an accessible manner. So what software package do we own that we have a license for that we could easily use to visualize that data? And that's all we've done so far. So I think that any agency could do it, and it doesn't take a lot of effort. To have Nirvana, I would love to have a few years and tens of millions of dollars. But since I don't have that, we're making do with what we can. And the products, it's really fun that what's so simple is making such a stir, because it's making things better.
Do you think that Virginia is acting as like a proof of concept that PEEP should be implemented in other states? Have other states reached out to you for guidance? And how long do you think you need to collect data on how effective PEEP is before people start to acknowledge that it's a useful, simple, way to implement the permitting process?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, it'd be really cool if this got implemented in other states. Already in Virginia, there's an effort to start implementing this in other agencies. So we are now considered to be the pilot project for the Commonwealth for other agencies that need permits, and that's just starting. That's happening now. So I think people that have used it already, in terms of the public sector, and even environmental groups that are interested in certain permit processes, they're all, the transparency and the ease of communication is just winning everybody. So I think it's something that would be fantastic to implement, around the country. I read an article from the Environmental Innovation Policy Center that they mentioned that, the Army Corps should start trying to do this, and in fact may do it in several years. I think from what I read in that article, it sounds like they're doing more of a pure e-permitting type process, which would be fantastic. I'd love to do it as well. I'm just taking a baby step right now and doing what we could do now to make a difference versus several years from now. I think, in my history of working on my own for 30 years or so, but also for big companies before and afterwards, keeping it simple and taking small steps, you can make a big difference versus the big grandiose plan that never gets implemented. So I think it might be better to just, try to do some simple things like PEEP and make a difference and then evolve.
Yeah.
It'd be so cool if on our PEEP, you could not only click on it and see where you are in a schedule, but click and find the actual application, the actual response from the regulator, the response back from the applicant. I'd love to have all that connected, but that's just that's a level of complication that it can be done with today's technology relatively easily. It's just linking to a database these information, but that's just another level of complexity we don't have the money and the time right now to do.
Is Virginia totally, do you guys just have one regulatory district? It looks like just Norfolk regulatory district.
Yeah, except for Baltimore has Fort Belvoir. They
Okay.
used to have Arlington Cemetery, but they don't anymore. But other
Okay.
than that, it's primarily Norfolk District, which makes it easier probably
That's,
in the
I was-
wetland program. But we have all these other programs.
yeah,
I mean, I
yeah.
always forget, like we have 60 something permits
Mhm.
now, all Region 3 of EPA.
Okay, that's one thing I was thinking about, because I've worked in a few different states, and like Texas comes to mind, that has different regulatory districts involved, and all of these regulatory districts have their own way of doing things and some different regulations. And so that I was wondering how, like, was the Corps receptive to being a part of this process, and like, is there they seem like sort of the overall cap that can, for lack of a better word, like trickle down to create a program that all states could find accessible. But yeah, I was wondering if you dealt with anything with varying districts.
So the Corps only is involved in 2 of our 12 major permit classes.
Mm-hmm.
So
Wetlands
and mitigation banking.
Yep.
And in mitigation banking, they really jumped all in with us, and this culminated in signing this MOA just recently.
Mm-hmm.
And they're really working extraordinarily well. I mean, I met Colonel Hallberg last January when I was here, when I became appointed, and luckily I knew all the top people at the Army Corps Norfolk District. So it was, they reached out to me I think the day I was announced. Let's set up a meeting, let's get to going. So they really want to work together, and it's improving. We're dramatically cutting down that time for that process. On the permit process itself for wetland permits, they're not involved with us, except we are tracking, how everything happens, and it's
Mm-hmm.
available to them. But, the problem is they're on a different database system,
Mm-hmm.
and than us. So that would take a federal level leader to want to get it integrated. I'd love
Mm-hmm.
to see that happen, and I'd love for them to just join our system, but they have their own system.
Yeah.
So who knows? I think the success we're already seeing in mitigation banking, I mean, if all goes well, we're going to cut, Norfolk is averaging around 1,300 days roughly in Becca's report. And our goal right now, A to Z, is 455 days. Personally, that's kind of long, but that includes all the, the pre-app time, the time for the agents to get back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
The first time I did one, 1991 in Virginia, it took me 3 years to get approved. I had to get to the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works. He came personally to my site with a big team, and his counterpart from EPA headquarters. And I got it down eventually to 6 months. Okay. Then the 2008 rule passed. It was trying to, quote, streamline things and set up a goal of a year. Well, all I can tell you is that once they put up regulations, it made it take longer.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's got to be a refocusing on that. And I hope, with the infrastructure bill and all these ideas to build things in the environment, they're not going to get built in any timely manner unless we get the permitting process more efficient and effective.
Yep.
And it's going to be, you're going to just see more and more and more delays because we don't have an efficient permitting process. So it'd be cool to see someone at the federal level want to lead this and do it.
Awesome. I agree.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining us. You have 3 more years of your appointment? Okay,
Yep.
let's make that the last time you retire. You've done so much work for the community. I think it's time for the next generation to take the baton and run with it. And you're a pioneer, and we appreciate your time. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.